Thomas Gray never expected his quiet life to be interrupted by a message glowing on his old datapad, especially one sealed with the official crest of the Galactic Allied Council, a symbol he'd only ever seen in textbooks. He was just an Earth-based language expert, working from a small office surrounded by dusty books and half-broken translation screens. But the message said he was being summoned for immediate interspecies diplomatic services to the Galactic Citadel, the most powerful political station in the known universe. He thought it had to be a mistake, a wrong file, a joke, but the ship came the next day, sleek and silent, landing right in the middle of the new Oxford Research Park, making the local news and scaring the geese without giving him time to pack properly. The diplomatic shuttle whisked him away from Earth, away from gravity, and into the vast black sea of space. He was told nothing during the journey, except that his presence had been personally requested. No name, no reason, just his confused reflection staring back at him from the shuttle window. When they finally arrived, the Galactic Citadel took his breath away. It wasn't a building, it was a floating continent of gold and crystal, orbiting a blue star like a silent god. He was led through glowing halls by silent guards with mirrored faces, passed through scanners that whispered things in languages he didn't know, and brought to a vast chamber that looked more like a cathedral than a courtroom. The Hall of Harmonies, they called it, where the leaders of all major species gathered to settle disputes and form alliances. There were over 200 beings inside, sitting on curved tiers, some tall as trees, others no larger than mice, all watching as Thomas was guided to the center like a lost tourist in a cosmic opera. A mechanical voice echoed around the hall, announcing Terran Representative Thomas Gray of Sector 119E. He wanted to correct them. He wasn't a representative of anything, just a language nerd from a university no one here had ever heard of. But before he could speak, the doors at the far end of the hall opened with a sound like thunder wrapped in silk. A procession entered, moving with slow, heavy grace. First came the royal guards in armor of liquid silver, then advisors in floating robes of light, and finally, the queen herself, Haretha Dominion, ruler of over 90 star systems, known for her unmatched power and beauty and her fierce silence in court matters. Her presence was unlike anything Thomas had ever felt. She didn't walk, she flowed, like space itself, bent politely to let her pass. She reached the central dais, stood still, and raised one slender hand. The hall grew so quiet, it felt like even time was waiting. In a voice both soft and commanding, she declared, "I claim Thomas Gray of Terra as my chosen bondmate." The translation devices around the hall stuttered for a moment, repeating her words in a dozen languages as though struggling to believe them. 1,000 eyes turned to Thomas. Some blinked, some narrowed, some too many widened in disbelief. The silence cracked into gasps, hisses, and metallic clicks of shock. Thomas stared up at the queen, mouth slightly open, heart pounding in confusion. He had no political status, no alliances, no idea what was happening. He tried to speak, but his voice caught. "Wait, what?" he finally whispered, but the sound was swallowed by the hall's rising chaos. The court was erupting. Nobles leaned over to whisper to their aides. Envoys pressed glowing keys on their wrist, comes. And 2 ambassador drones began spinning in circles as if trying to reboot their protocols. Thomas stood frozen in the center of it all, a human caught in a storm of power plays and ancient rules, and he realized that nothing in his quiet Earth life had prepared him for this moment, not for the Queen's eyes, calm and unreadable, not for the crowd's disbelief, and certainly not for the fact that the most powerful ruler in the galaxy had just called him her husband. Thomas Gray didn't know how he got from the Hall of Harmonies to the Queen's royal shuttle. Only that one moment he was surrounded by shocked faces and buzzing voices. In the next, guards in shimmering armor were gently yet firmly guiding him through echoing corridors of light, past towering doors and silent statues of unknown rulers, until he stood inside a room that looked like the inside of a star, walls pulsing softly like heartbeats, air filled with a floral scent that shifted every few seconds. He sat on a floating chair he didn't remember agreeing to, while a small creature shaped like a sphere and made entirely of translucent crystal hovered beside him, scanning him with curious pulses of green light and muttering in a language he didn't recognize. Before he could ask anything, the door at the far end opened with no sound, and Queen Aurelia entered without her guards, her crown gone, dressed in something simpler, though still beautiful and otherworldly, her eyes studying him with a calm intensity that made Thomas feel like a puzzle being solved. "You are confused," she said, not unkindly. Thomas nodded quickly, his voice still catching on his tongue, though he forced himself to speak. "Why, me? I mean, no offense, Your Majesty, but I don't even know how to address you properly, let alone understand what just happened back there." The queen did not sit, but moved slowly to the center of the room, a sphere of light floating beside her, casting tiny stars on the floor. "The court does not know," she said. "Not yet. But I chose you with purpose, not at random." She gestured, and the floating sphere near Thomas projected an image into the airless world of starlines, constellations, glowing threads of information that pulsed with names and species. "There is a prophecy," she continued, ancient, older than even my empire, buried in the oracle vaults. Speaks of a time when the Chivalry throne will stand on the edge of division. That time is now. Thomas stared at the lines, not sure what he was seeing. "I still don't understand how this connects to me," he said slowly. "I'm not royal. I'm not even political. I study languages. That's it." The queen tilted her head. "And that is precisely why you were chosen. You are not from our systems. You are not part of the ancient bloodlines or their wars. You are a neutral force, unexpected, a variable none of them predicted. That gives you power." Thomas stood, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I don't want power. I didn't ask to be part of your game." She walked closer, close enough that he saw faint patterns on her skin, like silver ink, flowing just beneath the surface. "I know. That's what makes you dangerous to them, and valuable to me." The lights dimmed around them as if floating. Screens retracted, and for a moment, silence stretched between them like a thin line. "Then, tell me what you need," he said at last. "Tell me what's really going on." Ralia turned, her hands behind her back. "There is unrest in the council. My allies grow few, and my enemies grow bolder. But law binds them. In one law, old and unbroken, says a queen may choose a bondmate freely once in her reign. That bondmate shares the throne. If they harm him, they harm the throne itself. It is the one protection no court can undo." Thomas blinked, the weight of her words settling over him like gravity. "So I'm a shield," he said quietly. "More," she replied. "You are a question. They do not know what you will do. You disrupt their plans simply by existing in a position they cannot reach." "And what happens to me if this plan fails?" he asked. "Key, then we both fall," she answered. "But if it works, you will help keep the peace across 1,000 worlds." Thomas sat back down, slowly, head spinning. "This is insane," he whispered. "Everything about this is insane." Ralia almost smiled. "To them, it is chaos, but sometimes chaos is exactly what balance needs." The door opened again, and a tall figure with 4 arms and a face hidden behind a bronze mask entered, bowing silently. "The council requests your appearance," the figure said. "They demand clarity." Ralia turned to Thomas. "Then we shall give them some." They walked together down polished corridors that shimmered with reflections of the past, holographic memories of past rulers, wars, triumphs, and alliances. As they entered the council chamber again, all eyes turned to them. There was no silence. This time, only murmurs and rapid whispering as the queen took her seat on the throne of stars, and Thomas was guided to a place beside her. The speaker of the council, a crystalline being named Jarrell, whose voice sounded like wind through bells, stood and addressed the court. Queen Aurelia, your declaration shocked the court. It defied every known expectation. We ask why this human? Why now? The queen rose without hesitation. Because I trust him to protect what none of you have been able to agree on: stability. This is my right. It is legal. It is final. Murmurs rose again, louder now, filled with disapproval and disbelief. A noble from the Osirian ring stood, his skin flickering like fire. Earth has no voice in the high systems. This claim grants them power they did not earn. Another joined in. What do we know of this man? What are his loyalties? What stops him from selling our secrets to his world? Thomas stood then, surprising even himself. He raised his hand slightly. May I speak? The speaker nodded slowly. Speak, human. Thomas looked around, trying to find the right words. I didn't ask for this. I didn't come here to change anything. I was brought here without knowing why. But I've listened. I've learned. And I think maybe that's what your systems have been missing. Someone who listens first. The chamber quieted a little. Thomas continued. I don't know your politics. I don't know your wars. But I do know language. It's Kana. And what I see here is a group of people speaking over each other, not with each other. Kana. He looked at the queen. If she believes I can help hold the peace by simply being the unknown, then maybe that's worth trying. The court didn't erupt this time. Instead, there was a deep pause, heavy with thought. The queen said again, You may question him, she said. You may test him, but he stands beside me now, and the law is clear. The court session ended with slow, uncertain silence. Thomas was escorted back to a smaller chamber, this time one that overlooked the stars, the glass floor showing ships gliding below. Hey was alone for a moment before the robotic assistant, tall, thin droid with glowing eyes and tart. You are now classified as Royal Consort Probationary, it said in a clipped, formal tone. You will receive threat briefings, cultural training, and political strategy simulations beginning at first light. Thomas groaned. Do I at least get a pillow? Several, optimized for 9 species, the droid replied, then paused. Would you like tea? I would like answers, Thomas muttered. The droid tilted its head. Then I suggest asking the queen. She plays a long game. As the stars drifted past the window, Thomas realized his quiet life on Earth was truly gone. He was now part of something vast, ancient, and fragile. He didn't know if it was the right piece in this puzzle, but he was already on the board, and the queen had made her first move. Thomas, a Cray, woke up to a strange humming sound in his new room above the stars. Not sure if it was morning or midnight. In the galactic citadel, where time felt like a story someone else was telling. He had been there only 3 days, yet his life on Earth already felt like a dream he was slowly forgetting. He wasn't just a language expert now. He was the unexpected consort of the most powerful queen in the galaxy, and everyone had an opinion about that. His days were filled with lessons on court behavior, hand signals used by fish-like diplomats, and awkward meals where dishes blinked before being eaten. He had barely finished his first cup of bitter blue tea when his door slid open, revealing Lady Viren, one of Queen Irale's senior advisors. A tall alien with skin that shimmered like oil and eyes like spinning coins. The queen requests your presence, she said with her usual stiff formality. Thomas followed her through silent halls, wondering why the queen wanted to see him so early. When he entered the grand strategy room, he found Euralia standing alone before a massive screen filled with moving lines, dots, and flashing signals, some kind of real-time galaxy map. She didn't turn when he entered, just raised her hand and spoke quietly. "There is a problem." Thomas stepped closer, watching as one of the flashing red dots expanded into an image of a burning satellite. "Sabotage?" he asked. She nodded. "That outpost was destroyed last night. It was a listening post near the Drax border. No one claimed responsibility." He frowned. "But everyone suspects you." "Yes," she replied, "because it fell just hours after our alliance announcement." Thomas sat slowly at a nearby control chair. "Okay, so someone is trying to make it look like you're starting a war." Ralia finally turned to face him, her silver eyes unreadable. "We're trying to start one by forcing my hand." As the morning passed, messages began to flood, and some angry, some confused, some demanding explanations. The Council of Sectors called an emergency session. Thomas was not invited, but he watched through a secure channel as leaders from every system argued over who was behind the attack. The Queen stood firm, her voice calm, her face still, but Thomas could see the cracks forming. Some allies were growing quiet. Others asked strange questions. Trust was thinning like old paper. Hours later, as the session ended in disagreement, Euralia returned to her private chamber, and Thomas followed. "They don't believe you," he said gently. "Some never did," she answered, "but now they have a reason to say it out loud." She walked to the balcony that hung high over the citadel's inner gardens, stars glinting above like silent watchers. "They're waiting for me to make a mistake. One wrong step, and they will call me unfit. Okay. If they do that, I must face a full vote of legitimacy." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What happens if you lose?" "I lose everything," she said. "And Earth loses its new place at the table." The next day, things got worse. A leaked message appeared on the Council's network and audio file. That seemed to show Aurelia's voice giving orders to attack the listening post. It was fuzzy and low quality, but believable enough to cause panic. Thomas listened to it 3 times, and each time he heard something off, not in the words, but in the rhythm. He didn't say anything at first, unsure, but then he remembered his training. He wasn't a soldier or a diplomat, but he was a language expert. That was his edge. He spent the next 5 hours comparing the audio to past speeches the Queen had given, analyzing pitch, syntax, and tone. By the 6th hour, he was certain it wasn't her. Someone had forged the message. When he brought the data to Aurelia, she looked at him with something close to hope. "Can you prove it?" He nodded. "Yes, but I need access to the Royal Archive voice logs. All of them," she said. "But hurry." Thomas worked with a small AI assistant named Sen, shaped like a floating disc. With blinking green lights, the tension across the citadel grew. Protests broke out on fringe planets. Traders refused shipments. Some lesser nobles began calling Thomas the Earth Moth, blaming him for distracting the Queen from her duties. The name spread fast, used with sneers in court halls and quiet corners. Meanwhile, in the council, pressure built for a full vote on the Queen's leadership. Wave each hour, her grip on the throne weakened. Thomas, deep in voice comparison logs, barely noticed. He finally found it a perfect match in the wave signature to an old speech made by an ambassador from the Vaori cluster. The voice had been copied and stitched together to match the Queen's voice patterns. It was clever, but not clever enough. He presented his findings to the Royal Council chamber, and Aurelia summoned a private audience of her most trusted allies. One of them, Lord Rax, a noble with sharp teeth and sharper words, leaned forward. "If this is true, then we are looking at an internal betrayal." Thomas nodded. And whoever did this has access to sensitive recordings, possibly a council member, maybe even someone from your advisory circle. That sent ripples through the room. Auralia ordered a full investigation. At once, in the shadows of the court, someone panicked. That night, a hidden charge was found under Thomas's chair in the observatory, a small device that would have triggered an energy overload. He wasn't there, thankfully, but the message was clear. Stop digging, or you'll disappear. Queen increased his security, but Thomas knew that wouldn't stop the real threat. Someone in the highest places wanted him gone. Still, he refused to stop. He began interviewing every technician who had access to the voice logs, working through their speech patterns, cross-referencing responses, and slowly narrowing the list. Meanwhile, Auralia faced the council again, this time presenting Thomas's evidence. Some were convinced, others called it clever noise. One even mocked Earth's contribution, saying, "Do your apes now teach voice magic?" Thomas didn't flinch. He had expected that. But Aurelia's support did not waver. He has uncovered what none of us did. I trust him. That statement changed something. A few council members shifted, some reconsidered, but time was short. The vote of legitimacy was set for 2 days later. If Aurelia failed to clear her name by then, her throne could be removed and her power stripped. Earth would be locked out. Thomas had one final lead. Signal trace, deep in the voice logs, showing a signature ping from an old council chamber, rarely used. He went there alone, against orders, believing the truth lay hidden. What he found was an old console, dusty and forgotten, but still connected to the royal system. Someone had used it weeks ago to upload the fake message. T downloaded the proof, but as he turned, someone was waiting. A tall figure, masked, holding a long energy blade. "You should have stayed quiet, Terran," the voice said. Thomas barely dodged the first strike, running through the narrow chamber halls, breath sharp in his throat. He wasn't a fighter. He knew that. But he was fast, and desperate, and determined. He ducked through a vent shaft, crawled through wiring tunnels, and finally reached a secure room where he activated the emergency alert beacon. Guards arrived just in time. His attacker vanished, but not before Thomas got a clear look at their armor, marked with a house crest from Aurelia's own court. The betrayal was now confirmed. With the data in hand, the Queen presented it to the council the morning of the vote. The voice was fake. The attack was staged. The outpost destruction was traced back to mercenaries paid by House Mizar, one of her oldest rivals. The council fell into stunned silence. Mizar denied everything, but his own records were already leaking across the system. The vote turned. Aurelia remained on the throne, stronger than before. And Thomas, he was now no longer just a strange human who had arrived by chance. He was the one who saved the Queen's rule, the one who found the hidden enemy, the one who proved Earth's voice could carry weight across the stars. The court could no longer ignore him. The whispers changed. Some called him dangerous. Others called him clever. But all now watched him with wary respect. And as he stood beside Queen Aurelia once more, looking out over the shining systems of the galactic citadel, he realized something deep inside him had shifted. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was a part of this, a piece on the board. And the game was far from over. Thomas Gray had barely tasted peace since the Queen's rule was saved. One crisis faded only to reveal the edge of another, sharper and more hidden, like a knife slipped beneath silk. His name now carried weight in the court, but weight was not always welcome. And eyes followed him in the halls, not with admiration, but calculation, trying to measure how one human had gone, from unknown visitor to protector of the crown in mere days. The Queen trusted him openly, a gesture that made her stronger in some ways, but placed a target on his back in others. And even now, as he walked through the high crystal towers of the citadel with his translator earpiece quietly humming in two, guards flanking him, he knew something was wrong again. It wasn't the silence that was normal in the upper corridors, but the pressure in the air. The tension that made the lights flicker too fast and the walls feel too smooth, as though the citadel itself was holding its breath. He was on his way to a small diplomatic meeting between the Queen and a visiting envoy from the Meraxi Combine, a powerful faction known for secrecy and trade control, and he had been asked to serve as an observer, not speaker. But Thomas had learned that titles meant little here, and roles shifted like stars in a black sea. The Queen sat at a low, circular table, surrounded by gentle heatlights designed for the cold-blooded Meraxi, who shimmered like lizards dipped in gold paint, their voices hissing but precise, and the tea served in wide, flat bowls steamed, with a soft scent like burnt sugar and iron. Thomas sat beside her, silent, listening, learning, watching the way the Queen smiled with just the right amount of warmth. Never too much, never too fast, as the Meraxi leader discussed trade lanes and joint patrols. But then something strange happened. One of the guards behind the envoy reached forward, too suddenly. And in that moment, Thomas saw the faint flicker of a blade beneath the sleeve. Thin and shaped like a fang, and time felt like it bent sideways. Without thinking, he lunged forward, tipping the tea bowl into the path of the blade, just as it struck forward, not toward the Queen, but toward the Meraxi leader himself. Chaos exploded in soundless flashes as the Queen's guards leaped into action, the traitorous guard vanishing in a blink through a side panel, and the Meraxi leader fell back, arm bleeding but alive, his eyes wide and furious. In seconds, the room filled with alarms and security drones, and Thomas sat there, blinking through spilled tea and shattered ceramic, wondering if he'd just stopped a diplomatic disaster or caused one. Hours later, as the Queen's advisors argued about what had happened, and the Meraxi issued cold warnings about breach of trust, Thomas was quietly pulled aside by a silent figure wearing white, the Queen's personal intelligence chief, a woman named Commander Reese, who never blinked and always spoke as if the air itself were listening. "That was not a political act," she said simply. "That was a test." Thomas frowned. "A test of what?" "Of how we react," Reese said. "Someone wants the Queen to lose her new allies. They failed today, but they will try again, and not all enemies use blades." That night, Thomas sat alone in the starlit observatory, sipping the real version of the tea he had ruined, thinking about this strange way his life had become a path of fire and whispers. He was no hero. He hadn't trained for this. He liked books and quiet and words. But now he was caught between empires and shadows, and the only way out was forward. The next day brought new tension. 2 more alliances began to fray. In one system, the Niveran Reach declared it would no longer send its counselor to Citadel meetings. "They say the Queen is too distracted by her Earthman to lead," one report read. Thomas felt the weight of it press into his chest. He hadn't asked for this attention, but it was his now. So he started studying. He read every file on known assassins, every list of court loyalties, every footnote on ancient pacts, and began building a quiet theory. What if this wasn't about the Queen at all? What if this was about the throne itself? About the idea that one person could unite the galaxy through peace, not force? He shared his thoughts with the Queen over a private dinner, the first moment of calm they'd had in days. She listened, eyes glowing softly in the candlelight, then nodded. "I've always known there were some who hate the idea of order through choice," she said. "But you may be right. Someone is trying to make chaos feel safer than unity." That was when the second attempt came, not a knife this time, but poison. A rare toxin slipped into a ceremonial drink offered to Thomas during a public celebration for his bravery. He drank only a sip, but that was enough to send him collapsing with fire in his veins and blinding light in his head. He woke up too, days later in a secure chamber, pale, weak, and surrounded by 6 layers of guards. The queen sat nearby, her expression unreadable, and when he opened his eyes, she leaned closer. "You're lucky," she said. "That toxin has no cure, only time. You beat it." Thomas tried to speak, but his voice cracked like dry leaves. "Who?" She shook her head. "No one claimed credit, but we're closing in. We found traces of the toxin in a diplomatic satchel from the Vaori sector. That caught his attention. The Vaori had been quiet since the last council vote. Too quiet. Soon as he recovered enough to walk, Thomas requested access to old Vaori Alliance logs, looking for anything that might show a motive or connection. What he found was small, almost forgettable. An old trade route between Vaori and House Mizar had gone dark 6 months ago. Right around the time the queen started seeking new allies. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread, and he pulled it. As he and Commander Reese followed the trail, they uncovered something bigger. Secret fund used to pay mercenaries. Encrypted messages sent to systems outside council control, and a hidden ship that had landed near the Citadel just before the team meeting. Everything pointed to a joint conspiracy between Mizar and Vaori. Remnants, 2 enemies with very different goals, but one shared fear. A united galaxy under a queen who wasn't easy to manipulate. Reese warned the queen immediately, and plans were made for a quiet arrest during the next council session. But someone was faster. One of Reese's top agents was found dead, left in the docking bay with a warning carved into the floor. "Peace will burn." The queen tightened her guard. Thomas kept investigating. Time was running out. The final confrontation came unexpectedly during a simple tea ceremony meant to restore trust with the Meraxi. Thomas attended only because he had been specifically invited by the Meraxi leader, who now considered him a worthy shield. As the ceremony began, everything seemed calm to calm. Thomas noticed one servant moving differently, arms too stiff, steps too quiet. He leaned forward and whispered to the queen, who gave a tiny nod. The servant placed the tea tray and turned to leave, but Thomas stopped him. "Wait," he said, standing. "I don't think you belong here." The servant froze, then moved, faster than thought, pulling a hidden blade, but before he could strike, Thomas grabbed the hot teapot and flung it into his face. The assassin screamed. Guards tackled him, and under the broken disguise was a face Thomas had seen before in the old Vaori ambassador's delegation. With that, the final link was made. The queen stood and addressed the room, not just the Meraxi, but the entire council, many of whom were watching via stream. She revealed the plot, the attacks, the false evidence, the poison. The assassins all leading back to those who had tried to fracture the galaxy. One by one, the guilty houses were exposed. Arrests were made. Ships were seized. And as the queen closed her speech, she reached for Thomas's hand and held it up. "This man came to us with no army, no title, no power. But he used what he had: his mind, his honesty, his courage, and he saved not just me, but all of us." Some clapped, some did not, but none could deny the truth. Later, as they sat alone again in the quiet garden chamber, sipping real tea under artificial stars, Thomas looked at Auralia and asked, "Do you think it's over?" She shook her head. No, but we've won this round, and next time they'll know you're not just a symbol. You're a player." Thomas smiled, though. His eyes were tired. "Then I'll keep playing. One cup of tea at a time." And far above, in the vast silence between stars, something stirred a watcher, perhaps. Or another enemy waiting for their turn. But for now, peace held, and the game moved forward. The Citadel was quieter than usual, not with peace, but with the silence that came before something serious. And as Thomas Gray stood before the Grand Council, he could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, watching, not as a guest now, but as a man at the heart of a storm that refused to die down. Because after the failed assassination, the broken alliances, and the Queen's public support of a human outsider, the council demanded something dangerous: clarity, accountability, and truth, and they called for a trial of truth. A rare and ancient tradition in galactic rule, where all sides of a conflict were presented, judged, and revealed under the unbreakable truth fields, where lies would burn like fire in the speaker's throat, and secrets could no longer be hidden. And though Thomas had nothing to hide, he also knew the trial would not be fair, for this was not only about truth, but about power, and power always bent truth to fit its needs. Yet still, he agreed to stand before them, not as royalty, not as a warrior, but as himself. The chamber of the trial was vast, carved from a single piece of obsidian-like stone, with the ceiling lost in shadow, and the central circle glowing with soft blue light, where truth fields shimmered like glass walls around the speaker's platform. And the Queen sat high on her throne-like seat, removed from direct influence, but clearly present to show she still trusted him. While the rest of the council sat in their designated arcs, some with open expressions, others hidden behind masks. And directly across from Thomas sat the representatives from the houses of Mizar and Veori, who had denied all involvement in the earlier attacks, claiming to be victims of a conspiracy aimed to shame them and turn the galaxy against their proud legacies. The trial began with the council speaker announcing the charges, not against Thomas, but against the growing instability his presence and actions had supposedly caused questionable alliances, unofficial investigations, and influence over the Queen herself. And though none said it outright, it was clear some believed that if Thomas had never come to the Citadel, the galaxy would have remained stable, even if unjust. And now they wanted to turn the tide back by putting him in a corner. Thomas stepped into the truth field and felt the shift in the air. Immediately, every word spoken here would reflect only what the speaker believed as true, and falsehoods would be painfully rejected by the field's invisible energy, making it impossible to deceive. His voice was steady as he began, explaining every step he had taken since his arrival. From the invitation he never understood, to the Queen's sudden declaration, the first blade thrown during a peace meeting, and the poison and the clues he had found, the ships that didn't belong, the symbols hidden in the robes of the servant who attacked the Meraxi diplomat, and every word rang true. The field remaining calm, but the council grew more tense as he spoke, especially when he reached the financial trail he and Commander Reese had uncovered, and mentioned the coded transmissions sent from a Viori-controlled ship, signals that were traced directly to sabotage plans. At this, the Viori representative stood and demanded to speak, stepping into his own truth field and claiming that the evidence was planted, that the codes had been stolen from their archives by rogue agents looking to frame their noble house. And his voice was smooth, confident, and yet Thomas noticed how he avoided one simple fact. He never denied that the ship existed, nor that the messages were real land. When Thomas asked a direct question, if your house was innocent, why did your ambassador disappear the day before the tea ceremony? The truth field sparked red for a second, a flicker of resistance, as the Viori stumbled over an answer about unrelated travel, revealing just enough to cast doubt. The trial continued for hours. Witness after witness called, some from the Citadel Guard, others from outer posts who had intercepted strange ships or seen agents moving through places they had no reason to be. The longer it went on, the more the story came into focus, not as a single event, but a series of carefully woven lies meant to unravel trust and leadership. And at the center of it all was a fear that one queen could change everything with a human at her side. Then came a surprise commander. Reese stepped forward with a sealed packet she had recovered only the night before. a confession from one of the lower-level saboteurs who had tried to flee the Citadel in disguise, and in it was the name of the mastermind, a person Thomas had suspected, but dared not accuse without proof. Counselor Nerith of House Mazar, who had always voted with the Queen in public, but worked quietly against her in private, funding mercenaries, forging evidence, and turning old allies into enemies with whispers and bribes. The chamber exploded with noise, and Nerith rose from his seat, face calm, but voice sharp as he stepped into his truth field, claiming he had done nothing unlawful, that he had only sought to protect the old order from being dismantled by chaos. And for a moment the field accepted his words, until Reese read one line from the confession aloud. Nerith said the Queen had become blind, ruled by emotion, led by the Earthmen, and that her fall would bring balance in the field around. Nerith shimmered and flared, rejecting his earlier statement with a flash of heat. He gasped, stepping back, face pale, and the council erupted again, not with cheers, but with the tension of exposed secrets, and the speaker called for silence. The Queen finally stood, speaking only one sentence. Let the record show that truth, even when painful, will be our law. With that, the council voted overwhelmingly in favor of her continued leadership and in support of Thomas as a chosen consort and advisor. Not because of love, not because of prophecy, but because he had faced the test of truth and stood firm. Nerith and his co-conspirators were stripped of their titles and taken into custody, their houses placed under probationary watch. And for the first time in weeks, the air in the Citadel felt lighter, as if the very walls had exhaled. Thomas, the trial left scars deeper than any wound. He had seen how quickly truth could become a weapon, how easy it was for facts to be buried and fear to grow. And though he had survived, he knew peace was fragile. That night, Clee sat with the Queen on the same balcony where she had once named him her husband in front of the court, and he asked, "Did we win today?" And she replied, "No, Thomas, we simply delayed the next war." And her words were not bitter, but honest. And in that honesty, Thomas found the strength to go on, knowing that the truth had saved them this time. But truth alone would not be enough next time, not against enemies who could rewrite it. The Citadel glowed under twin moons as Thomas Gray stood at the center of the Hall of Accord, not as a guest or outsider anymore, but as the man the galaxy could no longer ignore, because after the trial of truth and the fall of Counselor Nerith, nothing had returned to normal instant. Everything had changed faster than anyone expected, and now the Queen, fierce and silent on her throne, had summoned not just nobles, but warlords, traitors, planetary governors, and sentients from systems that had long stood at the edge of diplomacy. Because today was not about punishment or trial, but about a question no one dared ask until now. Would a human wear a galactic crown? Not alone, but beside the most powerful queen the stars had known. Thomas didn't want it. Kaya, not really. He had never dreamed of ruling anyone, but choices had vanished the moment he survived the first blade, the first lie, the first truth field. And now the galaxy saw him not just as the Queen's consort, but as a living test of unity, a symbol that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As he stepped forward under the watch of 1,000 eyes, he could feel the pressure like gravity itself. The same kind he had felt that first day he arrived in the Queen's court, when she shocked the galaxy by declaring him her husband. But now the silence was deeper, heavier, because no one was laughing anymore. A strange ship had appeared 2 days earlier, just beyond the Meraxi border, without a signal, without a name, and inside were ruins that belonged to no known race technology that bent space and light and time, and the Council feared something older than their history might be watching, waiting, and maybe even testing them. And in that fear, the need for unity became urgent. The queen rose, and her voice echoed through the chamber like music and steel together as she said, "The galaxy needs a new shape." And then she turned to Thomas. And the words that followed were not scripted, but spoken from something deeper. "Will you accept the weight of what you never asked for? Not for power, but for peace?" And before he could even think, his answer came out, not loud, not brave, just simple. Yes. The coronation was unlike anything from Earth. No crown, no robe, no golden chair, only a mark placed on his right hand by a device older than most planets, a mark that glowed briefly, like a star being born, and vanished under his skin, bonding him to something beyond titles, beyond symbols. From that moment, he wasn't just Thomas Gray. He was now part of the galactic bond, a link of shared memory and thought that connected him to the rulers of every loyal system. And though it didn't control minds, it revealed intent, emotion, and truth when needed, and that terrified more people than it comforted. After the ceremony, when the stars outside the citadel spun in quiet celebration, the queen brought Thomas to the old vault deep below the palace, where ancient artifacts were sealed. And there, in silence, she showed him a crystal sphere that pulsed like a heartbeat, whispering in a language no translator could catch. And she said it came from beyond the galactic rim, from a place older than recorded time, and that recently it had started speaking again. Thomas placed his hand near it, and it flickered brighter, as if recognizing him. And suddenly, the sphere projected an image Earth, not as it was, but as it could be, wrapped in vines of energy, orbiting faster than before, its skies darker, and then the image shattered. The queen's face remained calm, but her voice held worry. "Something knows you, Thomas. Something from far away." That night, he barely slept, and by morning, messages from at least 5 systems had arrived, demanding answers. Some feared his rise, others saw it as prophecy, while a few called him a threat that must be removed. Before it was too late, Commander Rees intercepted 3 assassination plots within the first week, all targeting Thomas, each more desperate than the last. And though he never showed fear, Thomas knew the truth. His survival had become political, his death a symbol. During a council meeting days later, a surprise call came through, not from another system, but from Earth itself, the first direct contact since Thomas had left. And on the screen appeared a fleet commander who looked confused, stating Earth had detected strange readings from beyond Mars, wormholes blinking open and closing near their satellites, and people going missing in the shadows of space. Suddenly, the link cut off, but not before static formed a single word on screen: "Return." Thomas didn't understand what it meant, but the queen said one thing that chilled him: "They want you back, but not alive." As tension grew, Thomas proposed a journey, a diplomatic mission, but also a personal one, to visit the Ed systems and remind them why peace mattered, why unity wasn't about control, but about survival. And though the council argued, in the end, they agreed, mostly because no one else dared step into unknown territory now. The journey began aboard the royal cruiser Lightspeak, its hull glowing with quantum sails, faster than light and sound, and from planet to planet. Thomas spoke not like a king, but like a man caught in something bigger than himself, and his honesty won more hearts than fear ever could. But then came the final system. Verlin's reach, where strange signals echoed from moons that should have been silent. And when they landed, they found ruins shaped like the ones in the alien ship, and a message carved in metal: "The bond is not yours." Before they could react, drones appeared, not made of metal, but of living crystal, and attacked with silent precision, forcing the guards to fight for their lives. In the chaos, Thomas was pulled into a chamber underground, the walls pulsing with light, and a voice spoke in his mind: "Not human, not machine, but something in between, and it said, "You are not chosen. You are forged." When he awoke, the Queen and Reese were beside him. And though the battle above had ended, the message remained in his thoughts. Back at the Citadel, during a final gathering of the new Galactic Assembly, Thomas stood beside the Queen, hand in hers, and together they spoke not of victory, but of vigilance, because the galaxy was not saved. Not yet, only aware, awake, and more fragile than anyone had believed. The Queen named Thomas not a king, not even a prince, but something new, the first crowned human of the Accord, a living bridge between Earth and the stars. And while cheers filled the halls, Thomas watched the stars beyond the glass and knew the truth. The real challenge had only just begun, and whatever watched from the dark would not wait forever. But he would be ready, 'cause now he was no longer just human. He was part of something far greater, and the galaxy had given him its trust, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.